Greetings and salutations. Today we'll be covering the unfortunate case of Oakey Albert Al Kite Jr. Oakey, or Al as he preferred to be called, was an all-around, laid-back kind of guy. A real decent type. He was the type to have no real animosity aimed towards him. This went as far as to even remaining close friends with his ex-wife, Gail Kay, even after they had divorced in 1988. Al had even been noted to have made an effort to retain a positive relationship with his stepdaughter, Julie. In the early 1990s, Al became a manager of an accounting procedures company in California, which meant that he took on the task of writing finances for multiple projects. This included Lawrence Livermore National Laboratories, San Francisco's International Airport, and the Bay Area Rapid Transit. It wasn't until 1998 that an opportunity to move to Colorado was to arrive. He was given the opportunity to accept the job there, and since he enjoyed doing all things outdoors, which included golfing, hiking, camping, all that jazz, it made him even more eager to pull the trigger on the job. In 2002, Al's parent company decided to downsize, and Al was let go. However, he was able to obtain employment again a short time later, when he began to work for Carter Douglas, which was a relatively well-sized consulting firm. By early 2004, Al had once more been living the happy and carefree bachelor lifestyle in Colorado. He had been doing rather well for himself, having bought a property in Aurora along South Helena Street. The house itself was a two-story townhouse, which Al often joked was more room than he needed, especially as a middle-aged bachelor that liked to spend lots of time outside. He had also been able to meet a rather charming woman who he then started dating. Her name was Linda Angelopoulos. The two seemed to hit it off rather well, and while they played it rather casually for a few months, they started to float the idea of taking things more seriously and moving things forward. Earlier in 2004, the tenant that had been residing and renting out Al's basement apartment for the last few years had told Al that they were intending to move out in a few months, meaning that along with the new relationship, Al would be initiating the search for a new tenant to live on the lower floor of his townhouse. Al would put up ads around the University of Colorado's library, along with local papers shortly thereafter. In May 2004, someone responded. This man, who would identify himself as Robert Cooper, was willing to provide Al with a security deposit and the first month's rent at that same day, in order to make it happen much more quickly. This made his desperation strangely evident. Cooper had also mentioned that he had taken a job at Wells Fargo and was currently staying at his sister's house due to being transferred from the East Coast. Robert Cooper seemingly checked off every box for a potential tenant, but he appeared to be an unassuming, mild-mannered guy, so Al agreed to rent him the room. At some point within the next 3 days, his girlfriend came to the townhouse to pay him a visit, and she had coincidentally arrived just as Al was showing Cooper around the downstairs apartment that would be his new abode. She later stated that this was the only time they were nearby one another. She had to quickly duck and use the bathroom, and in the short amount of time that she was in the bathroom, Cooper had told Al that he had forgotten an important appointment, and then he made a hasty retreat. All Al's girlfriend was able to do was catch the briefest glimpse of the man. She would later go on to say, "He did not want me to see him at all." Despite this, Linda and several of Al's neighbors were unable to get a proper look at Cooper, yet they had been able to describe the type of clothing he was wearing. She said he was dressed very well, wearing a nice pair of pants and a suit coat. The mystery man was described as being in his late 30s, early 40s, and he had dark, curly, unruly hair while standing at about 5'8" tall and appearing to weigh 180 pounds. Most notably, Linda said he walked with a limp and carried a cane. Neither she nor Al put much of a thought on Cooper's hasty exit, believing he did really have a prior engagement that had just slipped his mind, or that he had some extreme form of social anxiety. In addition to Linda's lone sighting, there was a group of unrelated witnesses that recalled either seeing or even directly encountering the man named Robert Cooper, a local professor from the University of Colorado, who owned a property that was being rented out, was one of these individuals. who met a man matching the exact same physical description of Robert Cooper, and they discussed the property itself. However, this man apparently did not have a limp or carry a cane, and in fact, he even spoke to her with a Romanian accent, and apparently this professor was an expert in these accents, due to being familiar with Eastern European languages for her profession, and was good enough with the accents and languages to be able to differentiate different languages, such as the difference between Hungarian and Romanian. This man apparently approached several renters in the days and weeks preceding the interactions with Al Kite's advertisement. At least 3 of these renters recalled having encounters with this mysterious man, and particularly, all of them recall him having different characteristics. He had different accents and mannerisms, etc. It was as if he was putting on different acts, personas if you will, displays, and was playing characters for each potential witness. One of the potential witnesses described the man as being in his mid-30s, while another described him in his early 50s. In one case, a cane and a limp were also present, whereas in another, he walked completely normally, without any need for assistance or sign of an injury, past or present. In some cases, he had a thick accent, while in others, he spoke sparsely and said little in a very quiet, somewhat demure American voice. Al and Linda believed that as long as the guy could pay rent, he could come and go as he pleased. A few days later, on May 22nd, Al dropped Linda off at the airport. She was intending to take a week-long trip to Virginia Beach, while Al finalized the tenant's contract with Mr. Cooper and helped him get settled in. Supposedly, Cooper had said he needed some help, and by this point, Al knew that Linda had made plans to call once her plane had landed. It would be at around 3:30 p.m. when she landed and promptly made sure to call Al. She told him she had just landed and now seemed to be in a rather good mood on the other end. He told Linda that he had just fixed the pipe in the basement along with a neighbor and seemed to be having an overall very good Sunday. However, she noticed that Al seemed notably more quiet and distracted to some degree. Linda would quickly wish him a good weekend. Unfortunately, that would be the last she or anyone would ever speak to Al again, or anyone, excluding the individual, the man who would go on to take his life. On May 24th, just 2 days after Linda's departure, Al's absence from work was noted. He was a diligent worker who had prided himself on his punctuality and work ethic. His boss had tried to call Al, yet got no response, leading to the employer then getting into contact with Al's sister, who didn't live in Colorado, so she would go and in turn get in touch with the Aurora Police Department and arrange for a welfare check to be performed on Al. The police arrived within minutes and they would knock on the door, yet received no answer. However, the door had been left unlocked. The police would enter the home, and as they performed a cursory observation around the home in the hopes of finding some trace or clue of where Al could or would be, they would begin to go down into the basement, where Al's mysterious tenant was going to be living. And well, they would find a lot more than just a trace of Al. At the bottom of the stairs, the responding officers found the body of Al, hog-tied and lying face down in a puddle made of his own blood. There was blood splatter located all around, on the walls, on the floor, around his body, indicating that his death had not been a quick or painless one. He had been struck in the back of the head as he had been walking down the stairs. However, that had not been the death blow. Responding Detective Thomas Sobeski of the Aurora Police Department was the individual who would become one of the main lead investigators for the case. He later described the crime scene as the worst he'd ever seen. Investigators and analysts noted a wound on the back of Al's head, which indicated he had been hit from behind. Most likely, they believed that this had been given to him when he had been walking down the steps. However, the most frightening and shocking realization came when the police discovered that Al had not died painlessly, or even been given the mercy of a quick and simple death. This was found out through the analysis of the soles of his feet, which were badly bruised, beaten, and swollen, having been repeatedly beaten with a steel rod. Blades had been inserted through his ears, through his shoulders, and even right above the area of his eyes. Police would soon discover that Al had been bound with a cord. Not only had his hands been bound behind his back, but his feet had also been tied. This was found out through the marks of his wrist ligatures. The way he was bound would prevent him from moving at all, meaning that he would just have to endure the torture for as long as it went on. From there, the attacker would have proceeded to mercilessly torture Al for ceaseless hours on end. Said torture was so severe, his head had almost been severed from his body. Based on the information gathered, the investigators theorized the death had come from the 22 stab wounds that he had been given. It seemed as if he had been slain just a few short hours after having last spoken with his girlfriend, Linda, on the evening of Saturday, May 22nd, 2004. Having made himself at home, the criminal ate from Al's fridge, dressed in his clothing, and took a shower, along with slept in his bed. It is believed that Cooper may have stayed in the home for more than a full day after having murdered Al. Authorities found the crumpled up rental contract between Al and Cooper in the trash. The contact information that Cooper had provided had all been false, but of course a killer would likely do that. The name on the rental application read Robert Cooper. As above, it's definitely fake. The address, which was supposed to belong to the sister of this Robert Cooper, was actually the address of a school building. The reference phone number was that of a retirement home. The social security number, when looked up, belonged to an unrelated 80-year-old woman who lived in Indiana. And then there's the phone number on the rental application, which was an active number. The name itself had been used to purchase this phone. And the name itself, once more, Robert Cooper, was an alias with no connections to Wells Fargo in that area. However, the phone did not belong to any official phone line. It was a burner phone, a prepaid phone. When the police organized a search and traced the origin of this phone, as well as the current location of Al Kite's phone, they were surprised to find both of them moving through the Denver area. A search for the phones was able to find both of them. However, neither was in the hands of this unknown killer, this mystery killer. The police would soon learn that both phones, the burner phone belonging to the killer, Robert Cooper, and Al's own cell phone, had been abandoned at the 5 Points area in Denver. And this was an area that was frequented by the homeless. And apparently, one of them had handled the phone. The killer knew, or supposedly knew, that the phones would be picked up if left in this area and used, buying him time and wasting the police's efforts. There was a tentative connection to the nearby University of Colorado Medical School, which would become the focus point of the investigation. The reason this became a focus point was due to the signs, the flyers being posted in the area, which were about Al's apartment being up for rent. That, and it had been found out that the phone that Robert Cooper used had been purchased on the campus property itself. Investigators would also find that the criminal had taken Al's debit card and his truck keys. His card had been used substantially after his supposed time of death, but the ATM card had been used as late as the night of the murder and had at least $1,000 withdrawn from it. And fortunately for the investigation, the ATM cameras were able to capture something. These were several pictures of the perpetrator and his face. However, the perpetrator wore a ski mask, so essentially we have what amounts to unusable pictures, which only allow you to view the eyes and the area around it. Something that is of note is that the perpetrator took significantly less money than they could have, only taking about $1,000. Unfortunately, the killer had also been wearing gloves when he visited the ATM, so police were unable to find traces of fingerprints from the killer. It was sometime after visiting the ATM that the killer would go back to Al's townhouse, remove the blades from Al's body, placing them in the kitchen sink, along with a steel rod that was used to beat him, which then collectively had bleach poured all over them, along with a shower drain, and he would then walk out of the house and vanish while having left the truck somewhere in the street where it would later be found, leaving only the ATM receipt in the car. Now, there are those on the internet who believe the case may be tied to individuals who use credit cards of their victims in similar ways, such as Roy Charles Waller, who had also been known to disguise his identity in such a way where the perpetrator would pretend to have traits that he did not. There were other suspects who were considered, such as the very well-known serial killer, bank robber, burglar, arsonist, kidnapper, and sex offender, known as Israel Keyes. Keyes was considered due to having a very similar pattern to his crimes, along with having similarities from what little can be discerned within the pictures taken by the ATM, which bear a striking resemblance to him. Unfortunately for all those looking for answers with Keyes, he committed suicide while in police custody in 2012. With his death, he took any information that had not been previously divulged with him to the grave. Further still, many investigations have been fighting an uphill battle to determine which of the crimes that Keyes had committed were involved with each other. To this day, there has been little to no actionable evidence connecting this case to any other. However, there was a small amount of DNA found that was proven to be somewhat useful. It was not tied to anyone or anything else in anyone's databases. Yet, the Virginia-based Pardon Nano Labs was able to use it, along with DNA phenotyping, to create a genetic-based image and make a composite of what this individual would look like. This, along with the aid of composite artists, has been used to make the image of Robert Cooper, or at least what he could potentially look like. A few years ago, authorities went as far as to having to change the status of Al's murder from unsolved to unresolved. However, the detectives have remained positive that they will be able to find and prosecute whomever committed this particularly heinous crime. Authorities hope that sometime soon the case will be able to be moved forward. However, there is still no sign of the case moving closer to anyone being able to find out who had targeted Albert Al Kite Jr. or why he had been targeted. If you remained with me until the end, I thank you, and I do hope you stay tuned and subscribe for more content.